Okay, the next chapter we're going to cover is concerning oligopoly. In the textbook, the preceding chapter on monopolistic competition mentions the concentration ratio in its introductory section. This briefly introduces the four main market structures: perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Now, I have left the concentration ratio here in the oligopoly chapter and provided the table showing the concentration ratios in the major U.S. industries to help you understand the study of oligopoly. Now, mostly you'll find this chapter to be average in terms of difficulty. Some students, however, have a little extra trouble with simple game theory concepts introduced in this chapter, such as understanding how to read a payoff matrix. We'll work on that. There are some extra examples in an active learning exercise in this material, and there's also some good stuff in the book that you can do some extra work to learn those a little better. There are also some good exercises at the end of the chapter problems and in the study guide, and we'll also cover it in your homework as well. One of the extra examples in this PowerPoint chapter is the prisoner's dilemma example, in which two candidates agree not to run TV ads attacking each other, which is the best outcome for society. Now, self-interest leads to what's called a Nash equilibrium, in which each candidate reneges on the agreement, which is the worst possible outcome in society. So let's get started. So how do we measure market concentration? Well, first of all, what is market concentration? What is a concentration ratio, that is? Concentration ratio is the percentage of the market's total output supplied by its four largest firms. So how much of the market is concentrated in the top four firms in the market? The higher the concentration ratio, the less competition there is. If it's more concentrated in the top four firms, there's not as much competition because, well, four firms are dominating the market, four or fewer. This chapter focuses on oligopoly, which is a market structure with high concentration ratios. Just think a few firms providing everything in the market. Now, taking a look at some concentration ratios in selected U.S. industries as reported by the U.S. Census Bureau and the Federal Trade Commission. Video game console manufacturing is concentrated within the top four producers. In fact, I think we could say that's probably concentrated within two producers. Tennis balls is very concentrated industry, credit cards, and so on and so forth, all the way down to automobiles, which is 79% concentrated in top four automakers. Now, an oligopoly is a market structure in which only a few sellers offer similar or identical products. There's some strategic behavior in oligopoly. A firm's decision about price or quantity can affect other firms and cause them to react. So their changes in price and quantity, their firm's decisions can have effects on other competitors in the market. Again, there's not many competitors. The firm will consider these reactions when making decisions. Therefore, there's a bit of strategy in between, and some would say gamemanship. And that gamemanship is illustrated in game theory, which is the study of how people behave in strategic situations. Okay, so let's look at an example. The cell phone duopoly in Smalltown. Let's say Smalltown is a town with 140 residents. Here's the good. The quote-unquote good is actually a service. It's cell phone service with unlimited anytime minutes and a free phone. Smalltown's demand schedule is listed here, and two firms, let's say AT&T and Verizon. Now, a duopoly is an oligopoly with just two firms. Okay, you usually think oligopoly, you think a producer with just a few firms, 3 to 4, but in this case, it's a duopoly. There's two firms in this example, AT&T and Verizon. Now, each of the firm's costs is defined as follows. They have zero fixed costs, and they have a marginal cost of $10. So every time they add a new customer or a new service user, it costs them $10. Now, to understand the behavior in an oligopoly, we will consider an oligopoly with just two members, which again is a duopoly. The textbook's example of water is simpler because it uses zero marginal cost as well as zero fixed cost. This is appropriate because students you won't have my assistance when reading the textbook. Okay, so it's a little more simple example. However, we're going to work through this. But in class, with my guidance and on this slide set, we can go work through a slightly more complex example. All right, so the added complexity in this example is a non-zero marginal cost. However, fixed costs are still zero. So you probably think cell phones are more interesting than the water example anyway. So you might like this example better than the one in the textbook. To keep the example somewhat manageably simple, we assume that unlimited anytime minutes in a free cell phone go along with it. So you sign up for their service, you get a free phone, and you get unlimited minutes. Without either of these assumptions, the quote-unquote product consumers buy would not have a single well-defined price, but the price would vary based on how many minutes the customer used. It just makes it more complicated than we need. And we also have to wonder about what phone they bought for his or her service plan. So we're just using a very simple example. This is the demand schedule for a fictitious town of 140 residents called Smalltown with two firms, AT&T and Verizon, and their fixed costs are zero and the marginal costs are 10. So a lot of assumptions here. Now, before considering possible duopoly outcomes, we must first review competitive and monopoly outcomes. In a competitive outcomes, price equals marginal cost equals $10 in this example. Now that's competitive. Remember, we're assuming that marginal cost is constant at $10 per unit. At price $10, the market demand equals 120 units according to the demand schedule, which the two firms split. They split it evenly between AT&T and Verizon in this example. Economic profit is zero, as we learned in the chapter covering the firms in competitive markets. Now, that's a competitive outcome. But if we compare it to a monopoly outcome, a single firm will produce the quantity where economic profit is maximized. In this example, it would be profit be maximized at Q equals 60, and the firm would set price at 40 from the demand curve. Okay, so we've laid out what it would be in a competitive outcome here and what it would be a monopoly outcome here, chapters we covered previously. It is true, in fact, that marginal revenue equals marginal cost at Q equals 60. So even though the table does not provide sufficient detail to see this over here, but we're just giving you this, say, hey, if we work this and it was a monopoly, that would be where marginal revenue equals marginal cost is where they operate to determine the output will be Q equals 60. So, but if you're more curious about that, we can estimate that marginal revenue at Q equals 60 as follows: increase the output from 50 to 60, 50 to 70. The marginal revenue equals $200. The marginal the quantity demanded. The revenue demanded. The marginal revenue equals $200 and the quantity demanded equals 20. Marginal revenue equals 200 over 20 equals 10. Okay, so either way, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We're talking about the $10 figure from this previous slide here. Okay, right there. All right, so that slide there actually probably makes it more complicated than it needs to be. So let's get straight onto the problem. Now, let's look at a cell phone duopoly in Smalltown where there's one possible duopoly outcome: collusion. All right, let's say that they're having collusion. Collusion is an agreement among firms in which a market about quantities to produce or prices and charge. So two firms agree, let's say in a duopoly, to work together about what to produce and how much to charge for it. AT&T and Verizon could agree to each produce half of the monopoly output. In other words, we said the ideal monopoly output back on this previous slide right here would be 60. Okay. Now, they would split that, so each firm would produce a quantity of 30. They would agree to have a price of 40, as given here, and the profits would be $900 a piece. Now, that's if they work together and they just split the market. Now, let's talk about a cartel. A group of firms acting in unison, for example, AT&T and Verizon, the outcome with collusion is also a cartel. So, in the first activity, this exercise will lead you to discover that each firm has an incentive to cheat on the agreement. So that they could collude, but this exercise is going to show us why they might cheat on each other, okay? Causing a breakdown in profit-maximizing cartel outcome. Essentially, one firm sees an opportunity to take advantage of the other firm in the agreement, and it just falls apart. So we have our demand schedule here, price 0, how much we'd want to sell. At price 45, how much we'd want to sell. Naturally, as price goes up, quantity demand goes down. The duopoly outcome with collusion is as follows. Each firm agrees to produce the Q equals 30. Again, they're going to split the market evenly and earn a profit of $900. However, if AT&T reneges on the agreement and produces a quantity of 40 instead of their previously agreed upon 30, what happens to the market price and AT&T's profits? Is it in AT&T's best interest to renege on the agreement? If both firms renege and produce quantity 40, let's determine what each firm's profits would be. All right. Well, if both firms stick to the agreement, each firm's profit again would be $900. If AT&T reneges on the agreement, they cheat and produces a quantity of 40. The market quantity then is Verizon's 30 plus AT&T's 40, which is 70. And the market yields for an output of 70 a price of $35. Now you have to take a look at AT&T's profit, which is 40 times 35 minus their cost, the marginal cost. So every time they sell one, they cost them $10. So that's essentially $25 times 40, but I wanted to tell you how you got that $25. And they profit $1,000, which is more than the original $900, okay? AT&T's profits are higher if it reneges, okay, if it cheats on the deal, if it renegotiates without negotiating, if you follow. Verizon will conclude the same, so both firms renege and each produces quantity equals 40. So while AT&T was busy trifling and starting to cheat, they didn't realize Verizon was thinking to do the same thing. So instead of producing 60 or having a situation where one cheated and producing 70, let's say they both cheat. All right, Verizon concludes the same thing, so both firms renege. Well, when they're supposed to be producing 60 collectively, they both produce 40, which means the market quantity is 80 and the price goes down to 30. Okay, so if they both cheated, each firm's profit would be 40 times 30 minus 10, again, taking out the cost. So it would be 20 times 40, and that's $800. So if they both cheat, they're earning less money than if they had worked together. But the temptation is to try to chase this $1,000, which is more money than they would have had if they worked together. Okay? So the lure of getting 1,000 causes both of them to cheat, which gives them 800, which is lower than if they had worked together. Okay? Oh, that's a lot at once, but let it sink in. Maybe you rewind it and hear it again. Now, let's take a look at collusion versus self-interest. Both firms would be better off if they both stick to the cartel agreement. Okay, they'd get that $900. All right, but if each firm has an incentive to renege on the agreement, i.e., to get that $1,000, they're going to cheat and end up with $800. So the lesson is, it is difficult for an oligopoly, or in this case, a duopoly. It is difficult for oligopoly firms to form cartels and honor their agreements. Okay, think about it this way. They're already showing you they're going to cheat the market by working together in the first place. What's to stop them from cheating one another? Nothing. First rule of economics is people respond to incentives. Well, their incentive is to get that $1,000 by cheating their partner, so each one of them cheats and they end up with less than they would have had even if they just stuck with the original plan to cheat as a cartel. Kind of crazy, huh? All right. So the oligopoly equilibrium then. In this exercise, I'm going to show you that a Q equals 40 is the profit maximizing output for each firm. In the previous exercise, you were instructed to find the new market price, an important intermediate step before determining the effect on profit. Okay, so we had to figure out that we were both going to end up at 80 when they both cheated on each other instead of the originally agreed upon 60. In this exercise, the instructions do not ask you to determine the effect on the market price, but the intention is to see if you remember to do this critical intermediate step yourself. Okay, so again, we have our demand schedule. Okay, nothing's changed there. In the oligopoly equilibrium, if each firm produces a quantity of 40, we went through the reasoning as to why they might do that before, the market quantity equals 80 and the price equals 30. Each firm's profit then is 800. Okay, we showed you those calculations on the previous slides. Now let's ask this. Is it in AT&T's interest to increase its output further? What if they wanted to go up to a quantity of 50? What do you think is going to happen? Is it in Verizon's interest to increase its output to 50? Okay, so if they both did that, would you have a market output of 100? Okay, let's think about that. Now, if each firm produces a quantity of 40, then each firm's profit is 800. Okay, we've covered that. If AT&T further increases its output to a Q of 50, the market quantity, and assuming Verizon stays where they are, is 50 plus the 40, which is 90. Okay, we can look at our schedule here and see, well, at a price of, at a market output of 90, the market price is going to be 25. Whoa, I just messed that up. Hang on. Edit, undo, edit, undo. There we go. Right back at it. So we see that price is $25, okay? AT&T's profit then is that 50 times 25 minus their marginal cost. Again, marginal cost is for every unit, okay? So if they're selling 50 of them, you can just take that 10 straight off of price, okay? So it's essentially like saying 25 minus 10 times 50, or saying 15 times 50, and their AT&T's profit is $750. AT&T's profits are higher at 40, at a quantity output of 40, than it is at 50. Okay, the same is true for Verizon. So essentially, if they're going to try to work together, they need to actually have a solid cartel to work together so they can get that original 900. Okay, so they produce 30 apiece and the market output is 60. Now in this scenario, or in the previous scenario rather, they cheat on each other and they get all the way up to say 70 or 80 market output, which lowers their price, which means they're making an output of, or excuse me, they're making a profit of $800. Now in this scenario, if you take it a step further and they go all the way up to 50, if one of them does it, AT&T's profit will be a mere $750. If they both do it, it's going to go down even more. So cartels and collusion and duopolies, when they have collusion, makes for an interesting bedfellows as to who's going to cheat on who and who's going to cheat on what. Just think about it as a personal relationship. Generally speaking, if it's built on cheating to start, somebody's going to cheat on somebody in the long run, right? Same thing's going on in the markets here. Now let's talk about the equilibrium for an oligopoly. What's the best possible outcome? Where are they going to end up? It's something called a Nash equilibrium. It's named after John Nash, the brilliant mathematician who spilled over into economics. If you're a fan of the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, that was based on the life of John Nash, who unfortunately passed away here recently in a car accident. He's a Nobel laureate. Okay, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for this particular bit of work called the Nash equilibrium. Okay, it's a situation in which economic participants interacting with one another, like the two firms we were talking about in the previous example, each choose their best strategy given the strategies that all the others have chosen. Okay, it's kind of like two or three firms playing chess with each other. Okay, in this class we're going to talk about game theory basically with two firms. Our duopoly example has a Nash equilibrium in which each firm produces 40. Okay. Given that Verizon produces a quantity of 40, AT&T's best move is to produce a quantity of 40 as well. Given that AT&T produces a quantity of 40, Verizon's best move is to produce a quantity of 40. So it's a strategic thing that says, hey, this is the best thing for me. Where should I produce? They both end up at an equilibrium of 40. Okay, which is still not as good as their original equilibrium if they work together in collusion of producing 30 apiece. However, AT&T thinks Verizon's going to cheat by 10, so they cheat by 10. Verizon thinks AT&T is going to cheat by 10, so they cheat by 10. So we end up at 80 total units of phone service provided. Okay, so let's take a comparison of market outcomes. When firms in an oligopoly individually choose production to maximize profit, oligopoly quantity is greater than monopoly quantity, but smaller than competitive quantity. Okay, a monopolist can control the market. They don't have anybody to cheat on because they're the only ones doing it. They're going to operate at a quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And if you remember from the previous slide, that they're going to move on up to the demand curve and charge a price that's higher than the price at where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Okay, so, but this is still An oligopoly produces more than a monopoly, but it's not as much as a competitive market, because in a competitive market, you can't coordinate, and many firms are trying to produce as much as they can to make a profit. Okay. Now, that's quantity. Oligopoly price is greater than competitive price, but less than monopoly. All right. So competitive market's going to be the low price leader. A monopolist is going to be the high price leader, and an oligopoly is going to be somewhere in between. Our cell phone duopoly example demonstrates that a non-cooperative oligopoly outcome falls in between monopoly and competitive outcomes. So the output and the price effects. Increasing output has two effects on a firm's profit. Output effect is if price is greater than marginal cost, increasing output raises profits because the price is making more than your marginal cost for making another product. Now the price effect. Raising output increases a market quantity, which reduces price and reduces profit on all units sold. Okay. So if you raise your output, you raise your Q, it overall increases the market quantity. Remember, Verizon and AT&T, even if one produced 40 and the other produced 30, it reduced price because there's more goods on the market. Supply's increased, but it also reduces profit on all units sold. Remember how it went down from the original agreement was to make a profit of 900 at 30 and 30, and they saw the opportunity to move up to 40, and both of them moved up to 40 because they thought they were going to get 1,000, and in the end their profits both went down to 800. So that's the price effect. If output effect is greater than the price effect, the firm increases production. Now, if price effect is greater than the output effect, the firm reduces production. Okay? So if a firm can increase its output and it outdoes the effect of prices, the firm will increase production because if the output, if you're increasing that doesn't hurt your price, you can make more money, so they produce more. Now, if the price effect outpaces the output effect, the firm will reduce production because an increase in production would lower the price more dramatically, and it would lower the revenues that they receive. Kind of a clunky way of saying, hey, they're going to figure out how they can make more money. All right. The size of an oligopoly, as the number of firms in the market increases, the price effect becomes smaller. Okay. The number of firms in the market increases, it means it's becoming more competitive. The oligopoly looks more and more like a competitive market as they add firms to it. Okay. Price approaches marginal cost, means things are getting more competitive, and the market quantity approaches the socially efficient quantity. Another benefit of international trade that we should throw in here is that trade increases the number of firms competing. Okay, you have domestic firms and you can have foreign firms, which increases the quantity and brings price closer to the marginal cost. So however you do it, increasing the number of firms, increasing the number of firms in a market reduces the power of an oligopoly or a monopoly or whatever. Okay, there's an example in the textbook given that says, suppose that the U.S., Germany, and Japan each have two automakers, Ford and GM in the U.S., BMW and Mercedes in Germany, and Honda and Toyota in Japan. Without international trade in automobiles, each country has a duopoly. Okay, you have two firms in each country. With international trade, the number of sellers competing with each other across countries in the world market increases to 6. This drives prices down towards marginal costs and increases the market quantity towards a socially efficient quantity. So there's more competition, which is a good thing. Now, all of that was a lot of jargon. Some of it you're probably scratching your head, rewinding, trying to figure out what I was saying. One neat way to organize this and make it a little more apparent to where you see the outcomes is called game theory. Okay? Game theory helps us understand oligopoly and other situations where quote-unquote players interact and behave strategically. Think back to our previous example where we were talking about AT&T and Verizon. They were the players who interacted and behaved strategically. So the dominant strategy, which is a term in the chapter, is a strategy that is best for a player in a game regardless of the strategies chosen by other players. It's their go-to strategy. It's what they think is the best thing for them. Okay? Prisoner's Dilemma is a quote-unquote game between two captured criminals that illustrates why cooperation is difficult even when it is mutually beneficial. Okay. Now, quote-unquote players can be people, they can be firms, they can be countries, or other entities. A game is a situation in which the players interact. So a strategy is a decision or decision plan by a chosen player which takes into account the behavior and the likely reactions of other players. Okay? So start to wrap your mind around it being a game. Like AT&T and Verizon have different behaviors they can do. One of them is going to be a dominant strategy, but their moves are influenced by other players in the game. So Verizon takes into account what AT&T might do if they raise their prices or raise their output, and AT&T takes into account what Verizon might do if they increase their output. Okay, so they're considering each other. Now, in a unique situation like a duopoly, you bet they're doing that every day. All right, so let's do a prisoner's dilemma example. Okay. Now, let's say the police have caught Bonnie and Clyde, two suspected bank robbers, okay, and but only have enough evidence to imprison each for 1 year. Okay, so Bonnie and Clyde have been caught. They're bank robbers, but the police only have evidence to imprison each for a year as it stands. Now, the police, what they do in all the classic cop shows, they do in real life, the police question each Bonnie and Clyde in separate rooms and offer them the following deal. They say, hey, they're separated. They're two perps in different rooms. Think of a cop show. They tell each perp on their own, if you confess and implicate your partner, you go free. Okay. If you do not confess, but your partner implicates you, meaning you don't say a word, but your partner turns on you, you get 20 years in prison because they have all the evidence they need to put you away for bank robbery. If both of you confess, you each get 8 years in prison. Okay? So there's some outcomes here. First of all, the police only have enough information to keep them for a year. But they don't know that. The perps don't know that. Bonnie and Clyde don't know that. You can either confess or stay quiet. If you confess and implicate your partner, you get out for free. So there's your fourth outcome. You can either serve a year, go for free, okay, leave today, or you could stay quiet and your partner confesses and you get 20 years. If both of you tell on each other, you get 8 years. Okay. So, in class, if we're doing this in live class, I might ask for 2 volunteers to be my prisoners. Maybe I'll pick students that sit in different parts of the classroom that are less likely to know each other. And I tell them they'll be playing bank robbers who have been caught. So I'm going to interrogate each one of them separately, like they do in the police dramas. I don't know if y'all have even heard of NYPD Blue, but they used to do that all the time in that. They do it in Law and Order. They do it in Blue Bloods, whatever cop show you're watching these days. Okay. Now, we ask one student to step out of the room for a few moments, and we offer the first student the deal described on the slide. We make note of his or her choice, but we do not write it on the board. Have that student this other student who was out in the hall step back in the room and has to ask the other one to wait outside. Now, we offer student number 2 the deal described on the slide and ask the class not to give any hints about the decision student 1 has made. So for just illustrating this in the class, we make a note of the student's choice. Now we invite the other student back into the room. We write down both their choices on the board and reveal to each other their fate. Now, what we should see is each student plays the confess strategy. They're trying to get off scot-free, right? So the outcome of this role play, if you're playing along in your mind, is a classic prisoner's dilemma Nash equilibrium. Okay, each one of them is going to confess to try to get out of it. But even if the outcome is different, it's okay. We can work through that. Maybe we'll try this in class. We'll ask each student to give the reasons for the strategy he or she chose, and we explain why we expected both of them to confess and show them payoff metrics in the next slide, which we're going to illustrate. I just want to take you through that thought process. Now, we don't always have time to get through the material and do something like that, but maybe we can try that in class next time. But the material typically, this material has more of an impact on students because it's better than just lecturing on, say, a Bonnie and Clyde example. So maybe we'll work our way through that. Hey, this could be a good test of seeing people who are actually watching the video. Maybe I can find a couple people who aren't watching the video, and we could do that prisoner's dilemma on them. Now, back to our prisoner's dilemma example. All right, So confessing is the dominant strategy for both players. So that means that the Nash equilibrium is for both to confess. Okay. Now you have to set up a payoff matrix, which you need to begin to understand to recognize what the payoffs are. In green here is Bonnie's decision. Okay. Bonnie can either confess or remain silent. Now, depending on whether she confesses or remains silent, depending on what Clyde does, Bonnie's payoff is listed in green. Okay, Bonnie's payoff is listed in green. All right, Clyde's payoff is listed in this yellow. Okay, or tan, or whatever you want to call it. Let's call it yellow. Okay, Clyde can either confess or remain silent. If they both confess, they've turned on each other, they get 8 years each. If Bonnie remains silent but Clyde confesses, he goes free, and she gets 20 years. Conversely, if Clyde remains silent and Bonnie confesses, Clyde goes to jail for 20 years and Bonnie goes free. Okay? If both remain silent, they both get a year. Okay? I can hear you shouting out, thinking out, hey, I would do this, I would do that, I would do this. You have all the information in front of you. Bonnie and Clyde do not know that the police only have enough on them to be arrested for 1 year. They don't know that payoff. Okay? All they know is if I speak up, I go free. So what would you do if that's all you knew? Come on now. You know you would speak up, confess, and try to get out free. Either Clyde or Bonnie trying to get out for free. Well, if they both confess, that's their national equilibrium, what they're both going to do, they end up with 8 years apiece. Okay? Now, this slide is animated carefully as follows. First, if Clyde confesses, then just to review, then Bonnie gets 8 years if she confesses, or 20 years if she does not. If Clyde remains silent, going through Clyde's options here, Bonnie goes free if she confesses, or gets 1 year if she does not. At this point, it may be worth mentioning that Bonnie's best move is to confess, regardless of Clyde's decision. Hence, confess is Bonnie's dominant strategy. Okay? All right, look at Bonnie's payoffs here. Okay, she can either get 8 years or 20 years. See, comparing confess versus remain silent for Bonnie. She can get 8 years or 20 years. Okay, she can go free or get 1 year. Which one's better? Well, 8 years is better than 20 years in prison, yeah? So confess, put a check mark there. And then going free is a whole lot better than serving a year in prison, right? So put a check mark in this column. When she's deciding between confess and remaining silent, Bonnie is going to confess. Her better payoffs are over here between these two green, and they both happen to be confess. All right, now let's look at it the other way. If Bonnie confesses, Clyde gets 8 years if he confesses, and 20 years if he does not. So Clyde's got to do the math in his own head. If Bonnie remains silent, Clyde goes free if he confesses, or gets 1 year if he does not. So Clyde is trying to decide between whether he should confess or remain silent. Now here we're comparing left and right. With Clyde, remember, we're looking at confessing or remaining silent. We got to go up or down. Okay, choosing between confessing or remaining silent. Again, reviewing. Bonnie, choosing between left and right. She can either confess or remain silent. If she remains silent, she gets 20 years in this situation where Clyde confesses. If she confesses, she gets 8 years. You sure as heck don't want to spend 20 when you can spend 8, right? 12 more years of freedom, you're going to confess. So check mark over here. Now, she can either get a year or go free. What you going to do? You're going to go free. Check mark right here. Now, with Clyde, he has two choices. Confess or remain silent. See? He's on the horizontal, she's on the vertical. Okay? Confess or remain silent. Clyde is looking here. Well, if I confess, I get 8 years. If I remain silent, again, confess versus remain silent, confess versus remain silent, I could get 20 years. What's better? I'd rather do 8 years, right, than 20 years. Okay. Now, let's look confess or remain silent. If Bonnie remains silent, Clyde could either go free if he confesses or get 1 year. What's better? I'd rather go free. So I'd rather get 8 years versus 20 and go free versus 1 year. Okay? So check mark, check mark. I'd rather confess than remain silent in both of these situations. Okay? So Clyde's dominant strategy is to confess. Bonnie's dominant strategy is to confess. Okay? All right. Now, for beginning economics students, interpreting the prisoner's dilemma payoff matrix can be somewhat confusing. That's why we use things like color-coded or different patterns to let you know where you should be looking. The first thing you need to do when you're interpreting any payoff matrix is determine your two decisions. Bonnie can confess or remain silent. So she's always choosing between this box and that box. This box and that box. This box has the better payoff. This box has the better payoff. Both of them are confess. That means Bonnie's strategy, her dominant strategy, is to confess. Okay? Spend a little extra time on this to help you. Clyde's decisions are between confessing and remaining silent. In this example, if he remains silent and Bonnie confesses, he gets 20 years. Not good. If he confesses and Bonnie confesses, he gets 8 years. He'd rather serve 8 years than 20. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, if he's trying to decide between confessing and remaining silent and Bonnie remains silent, okay, if they both, if he confesses and Bonnie remains silent, Clyde goes free. Clyde's like, man, that's awesome. That's what I want. Okay? If he remains silent and Bonnie remains silent, he doesn't realize this, but he could get a year. Well, what would you rather do? Go free or spend a year in jail? Well, you'd rather go free. Okay, so check mark up here. Okay, so both of his chosen strategies, dominant strategy, is to confess. So when Bonnie's decision, dominant strategy, is to confess, and Clyde's decision rests in a dominant strategy, confess, what we know is going to happen is they're both going to confess. Okay, so the Nash equilibrium is that both are going to serve 8 years. Okay, capiche? You understand? Well, repetition will help. The reading and then also what we do in class will help you. So make sure you're doing that as well. Okay, but this video is somewhat helpful between that. Now keep in mind, everybody keeps coming back to me, usually when I teach this in class, and says, why don't they just stay silent? They don't know that the cops only have enough to keep them for a year. Okay, think about your cop shows. They're rolling in there and saying, hey, we don't have much evidence. No, they're going in there lying saying we got everything we need. Okay? All right, so keep that in mind. Your Nash equilibrium falls on two dominant strategies to confess. So your Nash equilibrium is 8 years in the slammer. Now, the outcome then is both confess and each gets 8 years in prison. Both would have been better off if they remained silent. But even if Bonnie and Clyde had agreed before being caught to remain silent, the logic and self-interest takes over and leads them to confess. They start thinking about that opportunity to get out scot-free. And then they consider, well, doggone, I don't want to be in here for 20 years. I better speak up. If nothing else, I'll get 8. Maybe I'll get lucky and get out for free. Now, the prisoner's dilemma illustrates why cooperation is so difficult even when it is both players' mutual interest. Okay, so it's in their mutual interest just to both remain silent and get a year. Okay, but all they can see, they don't really know of that. They just want to minimize their chances of spending 20 years in prison. Now, oligopolies as prisoner's dilemma. When oligopolies form a cartel, say like our Verizon and AT&T example, they form a cartel in hopes of reaching a monopoly outcome. They want to operate as a monopoly, okay, when they do it collectively. They become players in a prisoner's dilemma, say Verizon versus AT&T, our early example, the Duopoly in Smalltown. The cartel outcome maximizes profits, so each firm agrees to serve a quantity of 30 customers. So each one's going to serve 30. They split what monopoly output would be, and that's 60. And here's the payoff matrix in that example. Now, let me be clear. The term payoff matrix is fairly standard in microeconomics. So it may be worth you noting that the payoff matrix is going to be something you're going to see. However, in the textbook, it does not use this term. So I would just want to emphasize that the payoff matrix is something that's in this presentation, not necessarily in the textbook. It's something that's pretty common. So please note that term appears in two different places in this presentation, once on this slide and once on the bottom of the slide containing instructions for the activity learning that we were talking about before. Okay, actually that's the one coming up. I apologize. So let's look at that payoff matrix. AT&T and Verizon, the prisoner's dilemma. Okay. Each firm's dominant strategy is to renege on the agreement and produce a quantity of 40. Okay. You remember how confusing this was when I was trying to verbally explain it? We're just looking at tables and written in Word. The payoff matrix really will help you or help illustrate why they both end up at a quantity of 30. So AT&T has two choices: produce 30 or produce 40. Verizon has two choices: produce 30 or produce 40. Okay. Now, they're choosing, let's do Verizon first. We did the vertical columns first last time. Verizon can choose between 30 or 40. Well, what's better, $900 or $1,000? Well, $1,000, so check mark down here. What's better, $750 or $800? $800, well, check mark down here. That means Verizon's dominant strategy, both check marks are down in this payoff area, right? So their dominant strategy is to produce 40. All right. Flip the script. Let's go to AT&T. They're in the green payoffs. We're choosing between 30 and 40. So it means we're comparing this with this. What's better? Well, $1,000 is better than $1,000 better than $900. Yeah, by $100 in profit, and $800 is better than $750 by $50 in profit. So you can put check marks, two check marks, if you will, in the let's produce 40 column for AT&T. So Verizon's best thing that they can do, highest payoffs, produce 40, and AT&T's best thing to do is produce 40. Okay, their individual strategies. The dominant strategy for AT&T is to produce 40. The dominant strategy for Verizon is to produce 40. Okay, so it's not that they did collude initially, but individually their strategic aim realized, oh man, we're much better producing 40 than we are 30. We're much better producing 40 than we are 30. We're much better producing 40 than we are 30. Much better producing 40 than we are 30. So both of them say our dominant strategy is to produce 40. Well, what happens when both of them produce 40? Well, they end up in this box down here where AT&T produces 40 and Verizon produces 40, and they get a profit of $800 a piece. Okay? Let that soak in for a second. Of course, they're hoping for this 1,000. If they were working in a better collusion, better cartel, they'd realize, okay, the thing to do is to make 900. But they're both going to produce 40 because that's both their dominant strategies, and they're both going to end up with 800, which is not the highest payoff on the board. In fact, in this particular board, it's not the lowest, but it's not the highest for sure. Take a moment to let that rest, let that settle in. Take a look at the chart. Verizon's choosing between 30 and 40. They're choosing between 900 and 1,000. They're choosing between 30 and 40. They're choosing between 750 and 800. They're always going to want more, so their dominant strategy in both scenarios is to produce 40. AT&T's choosing between making a profit of 900 and 1,000. They're choosing between making a profit of 750 and 800. In both scenarios, they're better off making 40, so their dominant strategy is to produce 40. When you have these two dominant strategies, they're going to end up down here, okay, where they both produce 40 for those strategic reasons. All right, on to an activity. The Fair Wars game. The players here are Delta Airlines and United Airlines. Now, this is a great example. The choice is to cut fares by 50% or leave the fares alone. That's their two decisions. If both airlines cut fares, each airline's profits $400 million. Okay. If neither airline cuts fares, each airline's profit is $600 million. So these are one of the payoffs. If only one airline cuts its fares, its profit is $800 million. The other airline's profit is $200 million. We're going to draw a payoff matrix and find the Nash equilibrium. So again, if you had to work through this as verbiage, it gets very confusing very fast. However, if you put it in a payoff matrix, went backwards. If you put it in a payoff matrix, it becomes a little more cut and dry. All right. Well, let's look at here. All right. Let's compare Delta Airlines first. They can either cut fares or don't cut fares. All right. Now, what's better, 400 million or 200 million? 400 million. Okay. Put a check mark over on cut fare side. All right. What's better, 800 million or 600 million? Well, 800 million is better. Put a check mark on 800 million. So that's on the cut fare side. Both decisions are cut and dry. The dominant strategy for Delta Airlines is to cut fares. Okay, both have higher payoffs than the alternative. Now, flip the script. United Airlines, they have two choices. Cut fares, don't cut fares. Okay? All right, cut fares, don't cut fares. What's better, 400 million or 200 million? Well, 400 million, so put a check in the cut fares. All right. What's better, 800 million or 600 million? Well, you'd rather make 800 million, so you put a check in the cut fares. Okay? Column. So its dominant strategy is to cut fares. Well, when Delta's dominant strategy is to cut fares and United's dominant strategy is to cut fares because they both think they're going to be making more money, the Nash equilibrium falls where they overlap, and that's 400 million apiece. They're both going to cut fares and make a profit of 400 million apiece. Now again, let's take our time here because your being able to read this payoff matrix is key to your success of being able to make what is a convoluted problem very simple. Again, walk through it mentally. Delta Airline has two choices. Cut fares, don't cut fares. Left column versus right column in the green. Okay, see here in this example, Delta Airlines is green. You find out whatever the key is here, and here it says Delta's payoffs are in green. Well, we're choosing between left and right. Okay, left versus right. 400 million's more. That's cut fares. Okay, left and right in the green. 800 million's more. So you choose over here, cut fares. Okay, check mark, check mark. All right. When I was working through this in economics, I would have always put check marks in it. Okay, probably annoyed the people who bought my books afterwards, but they knew where the correct answers were. Now, the key to reading United Airlines, you're choosing between up and down. Okay, cut fares, don't cut fares. See, it's up and down, top and bottom. Where do they make more money? Well, here's on the top at cut fares, 400 over 200. Top and bottom, where they make more money? Well, it's here at 800 million versus 600 million. Check here, dominant strategies cut fares. That means both of them have a dominant strategy to cut fares. That means they're both going to cut fares, and they're going to end up right here. 400 million and 400 million. Okay, hopefully that helps. Let it soak in for a little bit. The matrix, everybody says, confuses me. Okay. Well, the matrix is a movie. It is sometimes confusing, but a payoff matrix is your best friend. You just have to be very careful how you're reading it. Delta is in green payoff. Okay, that's your key. That tells you what Delta gets. And it's left versus right because it's between cut fares and no cut fares. United is in yellow or tan, and it's up and down. Okay, comparing up and down. What's better? Up. What's better? Up. Both of them are cut fares. What's better? Left with Delta, left with Delta. So they're both going to cut fares, so their Nash equilibrium, what their dominant strategies come together, is right here. Okay. Some of you are like, okay, I got it. Some of you are like, okay, I need to go through this again. Please do. Payoff matrix again. Embrace it. Learn how to read it because it will make your world so much easier. Now don't get confused because the payoff matrix on the homework, on a test, in different classes that you take in economics from me or not, or that are mine or somewhere else, are all going to have payoff matrices. And they're your friend. They make a very verbose word problem very simple. You can draw your own payoff matrix and figure it out. Okay. Just remember, comparing left and right and up and down depending on who's where. Okay. The one on top, you're looking at left and right. Which one's better? Here you're looking at up and down. Something you're going to have to practice. You'll see it on the test. Now, other examples of prisoner's dilemma are ad wars. Two firms spend millions on TV ads to steal business from each other. Cell phone's a great example. Each firm's ad cancels out the effects of the other, and both firms' profits fall by the cost of the ads. They basically just cut each other's throats. OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, they're member countries that try to act like a cartel. They agree to limit oil production to boost prices and profits. Not working so well here lately. But agreements sometimes break down, like here lately, when individuals, countries renege to try to make a little fast cash. Okay, think of the Smalltown example. The first example of ad wars is not mentioned in your textbook. Here's an interesting note, though. When Congress banned cigarette advertising in television in 1971, cigarette manufacturers' profits actually rose because they weren't spending so much money on advertising. Prior to the ban, cigarette companies were stuck in a national equilibrium in which all were spending heavily on TV ads to steal business from one another. The ban, in effect, forced cigarette manufacturers to switch the cooperative outcome in which no one advertises on television. Okay. The next three examples, OPEC on this slide, is an arms race, the OPEC on this slide, the arms race, and the common resources that we're going to talk about on the next slide are discussed in much more detail in the textbook. Okay, so you can get much more detail there in the reading. Instead of covering these same examples in detail in this PowerPoint, I chose to present different examples so that you will be able, those who read the book will still have a reason to attend class and vice versa, and you get more reps. Things are fresher, but it's the same thing over and over. Again, I want you to see everything at least 2 or 3 times at a minimum. So it's useful for me to mention the book's examples here because they're gonna give you a little more reps on that and help you to be more familiar as you read the chapter. So another example of prisoner's dilemma is arms race between military superpowers. Think USA and the Soviet Union back in the day. Each country would be better off to disarm, be less harmful, but each has a dominant strategy of arming. That's why they keep doing it. They're building up their militaries. Common resources. All would be better off if everyone conserved common resources, say like the ocean or pasture greenland that's being shared by farmers. But each person's dominant strategy is to overuse those resources, okay? Because they will ultimately pay for them because they're common resources. So you can overfish and make more money. Now looking at prisoner's dilemma and society's welfare, a non-cooperative oligopoly equilibrium, okay? It's bad for oligopoly firms. It prevents them from achieving monopoly profits. So think about Verizon and AT&T in our example. They would have been better off each producing 30 units of phone service each and making a total of 60, which is where a monopoly would operate. If they could just keep the oligopoly together, they would make monopoly profits. So it's hard to do, though, because there's that Nash equilibrium telling them that they should renege on each other. Okay? Now, for the good of society, non-cooperative oligopolies are good for society in that quantity is closer to a socially efficient output. So in the cell phone example, it was great that they wanted to cheat on each other because it put 20 extra units on the market of cell phones. And that means that there was more quantity, which means the price is closer to marginal cost, means price is lower. Now, in other prisoners' dilemmas, the inability to cooperate may reduce social welfare. The example is the arms race where they really should be disarming, but there's actually more nuclear proliferation, which obviously can be a bad thing if nukes ever were used, or the threat of use really breaks down negotiations. So, or in the example where there's overuse of common resources, like say overfishing in a common ocean area. So in the arms race game, each of the superpowers would be better off if they could cooperate and sign an agreement to disarm, but the logic of self-interest dictates that each country will arm itself to the teeth. Okay? As a result, both countries are worse off for 2 reasons. 1, the risk of nuclear annihilation is higher, and 2, the resources consumed in the arms race could have been used elsewhere. The opportunity cost, you could use that money to feed the poor or clothe people or educate people. The following slide presents another example in which the inability to cooperate reduces social welfare. Okay, so another example is negative campaign ads. The election of 2 candidates, let's say one from R and one from D. If R runs a negative ad attacking D, 3,000 fewer people will vote for D. 1,000 of these people will vote for R and the rest abstain. So there's 2,000 people not voting anymore. If D runs a negative attack on R loses 3,000 votes, D gains 1,000, and 2,000 abstain. R and D agree to refrain from running attack ads. Will each of them stick to the agreement? Well, this slide and the 2 that follow work through an example that is especially topical during election years, which I feel like we're having one like every year. But think about presidential election. This particular example does not appear in the textbook, so it's not necessarily something you'll see on your homework questions. But I like using this example because most students find it interesting. It explains why negative ads flood the airways prior to elections, and it explains the effects of ads on society. So let's roll forward with it. Okay, so in looking at negative ad campaigns, mutual cooperation is the benchmark outcome. Payoffs and other sales, when we're looking across the payoff matrix, are differences in votes received relative to the mutual cooperation outcome. This does not mean that there's a tie up in the mutual cooperation outcome or the mutual defection outcome. It means that the winner will be decided by factors other than whether the attack ads run or not. Okay, so let's consider R's decision. R is better off defecting, i.e. running ads attacking D, because remember they're saying, hey, we're not going to run attack ads, but they're better off defecting whether D cooperates or defects. If D cooperates, R's attack ads result in 1,000 more votes for R and 3,000 fewer votes for D. So there's a good payoff. They get more votes and their competitor gets less votes. Conversely, if D defects, R loses fewer votes if he runs attack ads than if he cooperates. Hence, running attack ads is a dominant strategy for R. The payoffs here are symmetric, so defecting is also D's dominant strategy. Now, keep in mind, they're symmetric. That's not always the case. This game has a Nash equilibrium in which both candidates defect, and this is one reason why in the real world we see so many attack ads in the weeks leading up to an election. This is real world, so okay. These numbers may not be entirely accurate, but both of them are considering the fact that they, like if R ran an attack ad on a D, they would gain 1,000 votes, but the D also loses 2,000 votes. So the R gets more votes and then takes more votes away from the D. So let's look at how we've been looking at it before. R has two decisions, left and right. They can do not run attack ads, which is cooperation on their agreement, or run attack ads, which is a defection from their agreement, or a negotiation, a renege. They can choose between no votes lost and gained or getting 1,000 votes. Okay, what are you going to do? You want 1,000 votes. Check mark over here. They can lose 3,000 votes or lose only 2,000 votes. Which one's better? Losing only 2. So check mark over here. Republicans, or excuse me, I'm not supposed to use that word. Let's say he's an elephant. R's decision, then, dominant strategy, is to run an attack ad. Now, conversely, the Democrats, see, there I go again. Let's talk about donkeys, the D's. Can choose between up and down. Do not run the attack ads, which means they're cooperating, or run the attack ads. Well, which one should they do? They either lose no votes or gain no votes, or they gain 1,000 votes. Well, what would you rather do if you're running as a D? You'd want to get the 1,000 votes, so check mark in the run attack ads. All right, comparing up and down, they can either lose 3,000 votes or lose 2,000 votes. Well, only losing 2 versus losing 3 is a better thing, so check mark in the run the attack ads. So that means both R and D's, D and R's, dominant strategy is to run the attack ads. So when they both do that, we go down here to the matrix where run attack ads, and the D's decision is to run attack ads. They're both going to lose 2,000 votes. Okay? Seems kind of silly, doesn't it? But that's their Nash equilibrium. They're both going to run attack ads and turn off 4,000 people collectively. That's as real world as it gets. The Nash equilibrium is for both candidates to run attack ads. The effect on the election outcome is really none because they cancel out each other. Each side's ads cancel out the effects of the other side's ads. The effects on society is negative. It's 4,000 people who don't go to the polls because they're totally turned off by the candidates. Lower voter turnout, higher apathy about politics, less voter scrutiny of elected officials' actions, which is not a good thing. So people become bystanders instead of voters. So why people sometimes cooperate? When the game is repeated many times, cooperation may be possible. So if they played that strategy out over time, the two candidates, they might realize, hey, we're just turning people off and less people are voting. Perhaps if we did cooperate, something different could happen. Verizon and AT&T could realize, if you think back to that example, that shoot, we could be making 900 working together. We're both trying to get 1,000. We're ended up with 800. Okay, so 900 is better than 800. So if you're going to do this again, perhaps we should start trusting each other and work together. The problem is they can't always trust each other once they've been cheated on. Okay, so when a game is repeated many times, cooperation may be possible. In the two examples I just gave you. Two strategies that may lead to cooperation: if your rival reneges in one round, and you say you're doing a multiple round game, you renege in all subsequent rounds. Okay. Tit for tat, whatever your rival does in one round, whether renege or cooperate, you do in the following round. So it just so happens if you work with a player in a game and they don't cheat on you, you're more likely not to cheat on them. Okay, so that's tit for tat. And if they cheat on you, you're more likely to cheat on them. Now, public policy towards oligopolies. Recall that one of the 10 principles in Chapter 1 is that governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. In oligopolies, production is too low and prices are too high. It's restricted production and the prices are higher than they would be in a competitive situation. This is relative to the social optimum. Okay, so what's best for society? Generally speaking, the production is too low, quantity is too low, and prices are too high. Role for policymakers here is to promote competition, prevent cooperation, to move the oligopoly outcome closer to an efficient outcome. All right. Now, there's a few laws on the books. They're old. They're from 1890 and 1914, but they are as alive in 2015 and beyond as can be. So the Sherman Antitrust Act from 1890 forbids collusion between competitors. So this is an age-old problem. And the Clayton Antitrust Act from 1914 is still alive and well. It strengthened the rights of individuals damaged by anti-competitive arrangements between firms. Okay, so if you're so inclined, there was an infamous phone call in which Robert Crandall, CEO of American Airlines, tried to convince another CEO, Howard Putnam, to raise fares by 20%. So he's actually on the record. It was kind of an idiot move. But you can actually Google and get the transcript of their conversation. Sometimes I'll read it in class, sometimes I don't. But you might find it interesting. If nothing else, it has curse words in it. Just to give you an idea of what companies have tried to do in the past to collude and cooperate. Now, there's controversies over antitrust policy. Most people agree that price-fixing agreements among competitors should be illegal. Some economists are concerned that policymakers go too far when using antitrust laws to stifle business practices that are not necessarily harmful and may be legitimate objectives. Okay, we will consider three such practices. The resale price maintenance, or quote-unquote fair trade, is the first one. This occurs when a manufacturer imposes lower limits on prices retailers can charge. Okay, sometimes the suggested manufacturer price is lower than retailers should be able to charge in terms of making a profit. Is often opposed because it appears to reduce competition at the retail level. Manufacturers are simply trying to drive down prices so they can sell more than what they produce. Believe it or not, there's a few manufacturers that tell Walmart what to charge for their goods. Rare nowadays, but it exists. Yet any market power the manufacturer has is at a wholesale level, and manufacturers do not gain from restricting competition at a retail level because that affects you. The practice has a legitimate objective, and this prevents discount retailers from free riding on the services provided by full-service retailers. So, let's say Walmart puts out advertisements for all these goods, and then a discounter gets a hold of the same goods and marks them way down and kind of rides the coattails of the advertisement, like Walmart getting the word out about some particular product. They could ride those coattails and just charge a lower price. So that there's a suggested manufacturer's retail price for a reason. There's a good example that the author gives about shopping for a home theater system. And you've probably had similar experiences shopping for electronics, maybe computers, digital stereos, and whatever. You visit a local store to check out different brands and models. The salesperson at the store is very knowledgeable. The store provided several maybe comfortable soundproof rooms if you're looking for a stereo or something, where you could spend as much time as you wanted, like auditioning various electronics, maybe playing an Xbox One or listen to a stereo, surround sound, whatever, watching a flat screen TV without outside noise. But based on that shopping experience, maybe you have selected a particular model made by some manufacturer, say XYZ manufacturer, which is a high-end brand that you really have to hear to appreciate. Okay, that's why they build those little areas where you can maybe sit down and watch TV or listen to a stereo. Now you've decided on, say, a brand and a model, XYZ Model 2 or something. You have the incentive to buy from a discount retailer. So you went into like Best Buy and you decided which ones you wanted, which electronics you wanted, but then you're going to try to shop it around and see if you can get it cheaper from a discount retailer. If you do this, the discount retailer is in effect free riding off the full service retailer, say like Best Buy that you visited. If all consumers use the full service retailers only for information and trying out stuff and purchase from discount stores, then the full service retailers would eventually go out of business. Okay, XYZ manufacturer knows this, so they also know that consumers are less likely to choose their equipment over cheaper brands if a consumer does not have the opportunity to hear how great XYZ sound system works or TV looks. So you can go into like a Best Buy, you can try out products there and then go buy it on like Amazon. Okay. All right. So to prevent discount retailers from driving full service retailers out of business, XYZ manufacturer engages a variation of fair trade practice discussed on this slide. XYZ only honors its warranty if the consumer purchased the product through an authorized retailer. I think we've all seen that. For a authorized retailer, for a retailer to become authorized, it must agree to sell XYZ's products at a price not lower than XYZ specifies. That's how they become an authorized retailer. You can find unauthorized retailers who will sell the same stuff at lower prices, but XYZ manufacturer is not going to honor the warranty unless you have bought it from an authorized seller of their products. So same thing as like a Samsung or a Sony or something. You went at Best Buy and tried out. You try to get it online at some unauthorized retail place. You may save some bucks, but you're not going to get the warranty, okay, because they're not an authorized retailer. Okay, so that's the fair trade. Second one is predatory pricing. This occurs when a firm cuts prices to prevent entry or drive a competitor out of the market so it can charge monopoly prices later. It's illegal under antitrust laws, but it's hard for courts to determine when the price cut is predatory and when it is competitive and beneficial to consumers. Many economists doubt that predatory pricing is a rational strategy because it involves selling at a loss, which is extremely costly to the firm, and it can backfire. Okay. Predatory pricing requires selling products below cost, generating losses. The firm must have deep pockets to sustain such losses and survive until its competitor leaves the market. Essentially, you take a loss to drive your competitors out of the market. Now, you got to be a big boy to be able to do that. Okay, you got to be a big store. All right. Afterward, there's no guarantee that economic profits from charging monopoly price will make up for the losses sustained during a period of predatory pricing. So, if you're going to do this to drive a business to drive another competitor out of business, you may take a loss and may not be able to recover from it. So suppose a firm engages in predatory pricing, sustains deep losses for a period of time, but succeeds in driving its competitor out of business. Even then, the pressure is not off. A potential entrant may be standing by, ready to jump in to the market to take a share of the monopoly profits that the firm otherwise would enjoy all of itself. So it's attractive to other firms. If so, then the firm is less likely to recover its losses, the firm that drove out the other firm. It's less likely to recover its losses that it endures while engaging in predatory pricing. Economists have done a fair amount of research on predatory pricing, and there's not yet really any consensus. Until there is, it might be a good idea to prosecute predatory pricing under antitrust laws, and that's what happens. Okay. Now, it gets a little more sticky in international trade, where, say, another country brings its products here and just dumps it on the market. It's called dumping. They charge prices well below their cost just to drive American competitors out of the business. That does happen. There was a real problem with that with Chinese firms in the last 20 years. Okay, third example is tying. Which occurs when a manufacturer bundles two products together and sells them for one price. I always find this annoying. For example, Microsoft includes a browser with its operating system. So it essentially sells you, say, Internet Explorer when you buy Microsoft, okay? When you buy the software needed for its operating system. So critics argue that tying gives firms more market power by connecting weak products to strong ones. So you're after, say, a Microsoft operating system, but you get all this other stuff that comes with it once it's installed. Others counter that tying cannot change market power. Buyers are not willing to pay more for two goods together than they are goods separately. You still have a demand schedule. And firms may use tying for price discrimination, which is not illegal, and which sometimes increases economic efficiency. But generally speaking, tying can get a little dicey as to what you're getting and what you want, okay, and whether it's a win for you, okay. It's forcing you, say, to use Internet Explorer once you download Microsoft operating systems. Now, in conclusion, oligopolies can end up looking like monopolies or competitive markets depending on the number of firms and how cooperative they are. That's the key word, how cooperative they are. We've shown that there's plenty of instances where they're not going to cooperate. The prisoner's dilemma shows how difficult it is for firms to maintain cooperation, and even when doing so, it's in their is in their best interest. So it's just tough for them to get along in a cartel or a duopoly. Policymakers use antitrust laws to regulate oligopolist behavior. The proper scope of these laws is subject to ongoing controversy. This is something that's happening every day. If you ever hear about mergers of, like, say, large cable companies, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, they're going to have to go in front of them and justify increasing the concentration in the market among firms, say among the top four. If they all merge together, you're moving more and more towards a monopoly or a duopoly, okay, which means firms are going to have market power. So one role for government is to get them to justify and to speak towards whether or not they will have market power, and if they do have market power, what they will do with it. So you'll hear about those from time to time on the news. So in summary, oligopolists can maximize profits if they form a cartel and act like monopolists. Okay. Yet self-interest leads each oligopolist to a higher quantity and lower price than under the monopoly outcome. The larger the number of firms, I should say, the closer the quantity and price will be to the levels which prevail under competition. So basically, more firms, the more competitive the situation. Okay. The prisoner's dilemma shows that self-interest can prevent people from cooperating, even when cooperation is in their mutual interest. The logic of a prisoner's dilemma applies in many situations, including in my life classes, your test. Think about that. Policymakers use the antitrust laws to prevent oligopolies from engaging in anti-competitive behavior such as price fixing, but the application of these laws is sometimes controversial. So that's the end of the slide show for this particular chapter on oligopoly. Just keep in mind, it started off kind of clunky, didn't it? You were like, oh my gosh, where's this lecture going? This is hard to follow. But then we introduced game theory, which simplified things. And then if you can make and interpret payoff matrix, the payoff matrix, it gets real simple real fast. Okay, you put all their strategies in 4 boxes when you're comparing the duopoly situation. Okay, so the more you work on this, the more simple a very convoluted problem can become. So hopefully oligopolies and game theory, which go hand in hand in economics, there are literally dozens upon hundreds maybe of different games that can be played in game theory and economics. Now in here, we're just basically looking at the prisoner's dilemma and the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so hopefully you found what started out to be a clunky chapter at least moderately interesting and hopefully a little bit simplified by the payoff matrix. As always, if you have a question, please give me a call, drop by the office, send me an email, let's set up a time to talk. So I can help you work through this, especially around interpreting a payoff matrix. That's a big deal. Will make your world a lot easier if you figure it out. If you don't ever figure it out, it's going to guarantee you to miss some test questions. So please stop by and let me know if you have any questions. Until next time, thanks so much.